pickup was hardly a late model, and it had been years since Gabriel had driven a manual transmission to boot. Gabriel had long ago given up even cursing at it every time the gears ground and threatened to snub the engine. It was enough that it had a cargo bed and be unassuming enough that it wouldn't stick out in anyone's memory. Oh, and run. He took it out of second and tried to get it into third, but it wouldn't take the gear until he kicked the clutch again. He'd been forced to double clutch more and more over the last couple of hours. Hopefully the truck would hold together for as long as he needed it. He'd checked the stars very carefully. It was definitely going to happen tonight. He only prayed that he'd gotten the location right. He found his way to the top of a drumlin where he could see most of the lower lands below. Grabbing his binoculars out of their case, he got out and went around to the front of the truck and scanned the inverse topography. A road that matched what he'd seen in the vision came downslope between two bluffs, then bottomed out and started to climb again as it came past the drumlin he was on. Soon headlights appeared in the distance. As they got closer, he could make out what sounded like a 6-cylinder engine, turning more revs than any car needed for the posted advisory speeds. As the car reached the bottom of the slope, the night suddenly became as bright as day. A ball of light fell from the sky and exploded on impact with a point maybe 40 feet from the road and 100 feet ahead of the car. The explosion was like a burst of fireworks, sending streaks of near-white light in every direction, with a strong enough shockwave to push the car almost onto its side. Amazingly, its driver managed to keep it in the road and moving on two wheels for several seconds before the car unbalanced and went into the woods alongside the road. The light from the meteor had faded about the same time the car had left the road. The sudden loss of life left Gabriel so night-blind he couldn't even see the truck he was leaning against. He felt his way back into the cab and waited for his eyes to recover. He only hoped the driver could wait that long. When he regained enough night vision that he could trust himself to navigate, he guided the pickup down onto the lower road near where the car had departed it. A trail of crushed vegetation indicated where the car had gone. Even so, the brush was dense and the slope fairly steep. Fortunately, shards of what looked like some kind of crystal, from the meteor by their distribution, gave off a dim glow, enough at least to see by. Taken by a sudden inspiration, Gabriel scooped up a handful of the shards. He immediately felt stronger than he had in at least 30 years, if not his life, and more sure-footed. And now that he had descended from the road to relatively level ground, he could finally get a decent look at what had happened to the car. Judging from the gouges in the ground, the car had rolled completely over at least once, perhaps twice. His eyes widened in alarm when he saw the man-sized branch of a tree rammed into the space where the driver's seat should have been. He hadn't spent 20 years of his life preparing for this only to be spoiled by an oak tree. The car wasn't quite inverted. He pushed aside some smaller, leafier branches, it was a willow, not an oak, and tried to see where the driver was. With the strength from the crystals, he was able to snap branches that would normally have required at least a bow saw until he could see into what was left of the car's interior. He wasn't sure if the driver was laying on the ground or hanging from the mangled metal in the interior. The driver's head and torso were in a miraculous pocket of clear space formed by the ground, the tree, and the relatively undamaged passenger side of the dashboard. His legs, however, were in the crumpled tangle of metal that had been the driver's seat. A handful of shards lay around and against him. Were they keeping him alive? If they were, they wouldn't be for long. A suspicious gurgling noise that came and went with the frequency of a human breath suggested he was in danger of choking on his own blood, whatever other injuries he might have. Gabriel quickly scrambled around to the passenger side and suddenly found himself ankle-deep in mud. He grabbed the frame of the car and, with effort, pulled himself free. Water stood on top of the mud, the saturated ground unable to absorb it. In the driver's current position, his nose was just barely clearing the water, and occasionally he was inhaling it. Perhaps his sudden grab at the car had shifted it enough. Thank heavens for small favors. At least it wasn't blood, Gabriel hoped. He scooped at the mud, trying to create a dam that would keep the water level just a little bit lower inside the car. When that didn't work, he grabbed the boy's head and pulled him just a little bit forward so his head would rest on a solid part of the car, praying the boy didn't have a spinal injury. The gurgling stopped, and after a few minutes the boy's eyes flickered. A few seconds later the boy's eyes opened fully, and he glanced around the car before focusing on Gabriel. Who? he said weakly. How amazing. Most people, if they had managed to even be conscious in this situation, would be asking something to the effect of what happened. That the boy seemed to be aware of what had happened to him was astounding. A little bird told me where to find you, and I think the rest is best saved for later. It would have to be, because the boy had already lapsed back into unconsciousness. Gabriel briefly debated whether to try and bring supplies from the truck to the car, or carry the boy's mangled body to the truck while he still had the strength. He had a backboard and the equipment on the truck, but now the thought of maneuvering a 6-foot rigid object down the slope, wrestling the boy onto it, and worst of all, hauling it back up the slope by himself now felt like a recipe to kill them both. He poked into the twisted metal holding the boy's legs. Seeing what needed to be done, Gabriel climbed back up into the road and retrieved a saw and one of his nerve-blocking bands, though in the kid's state he probably wouldn't need it.